Hello, BISC1323. This is the beginning of recorded lecture 5.5, the final lecture in the entire quarter and the final chapter in the entire quarter, the endocrine system. So I kind of like this. You may have noticed I've been doing the chapters out of order. I kind of like this as a capstone, as a finale to all of this, because even though there are parts of this chapter that I don't like, it's going to reference a lot of things from earlier in this quarter and earlier in BISC 1303. So yeah, it's a cool way to finish. So the endocrine system is going to involve a lot of hormones. Here's a key term we originally learned about in BISC 1303. The key terms define a hormone as a chemical signaling molecule that acts to control or regulate specific physiological processes. So yeah, signaling molecule. What we didn't talk about in BISC 1303 are the different types of hormones. So hormones, these signaling molecules, can be lipid-derived hormones. What do I mean by lipid-derived? Well, the lipid I'm talking about is specifically cholesterol. Cholesterol is it's a type of lipid, and it can be used to build a lot of different hormones, like estradiol here. So you can see the structural similarities. But testosterone is also derived from cholesterol. It's just a category of hormones that are structurally similar to cholesterol because this is used to build these things. So lipid-derived hormones are derived from cholesterol, and estradiol, a female sex hormone involved in body development, is an example of a lipid-derived hormone. Also, hormones can be what are called amino acid-derived hormones. As the name implies, these are structurally derived from amino acids. So remember, amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. We got 20 of these. Not all of them are used to build hormones, but some of them, like tyrosine, are used to build things like epinephrine or tryptophan being used to build melatonin. Again, you can see the structural similarities here. They're not one and the same, but we're using this amino acid, which we know we have around, to build this signaling molecule. So amino acid derived hormones come from amino acids. And one example is melatonin. It's made in the brain. It helps regulate sleep cycle, but it's an amino acid derived hormone. And finally, our third type of hormone is something called peptide hormones. It should be called polypeptide hormones, but hey, I don't get to name these things. Peptide hormones are polypeptides, which are also known as proteins. These are way bigger than the other ones because they're big, long strings of amino acids, so they have a much larger structure. But yeah, they do the same job as the other things. They're messengers. They're signaling molecules. And a good example of this is insulin, which we'll actually talk about later today, involved in maintaining homeostasis of glucose in the blood. But yeah, peptide hormones are proteins are short chains of amino acids, and insulin's a good example of a peptide hormone. Now, all of these different types of hormones are working together to maintain, I just dropped this term a second ago, homeostasis. The key terms define homeostasis as the ability of an organism to maintain constant internal conditions. So that involves a lot of different things of osmolarity or pH or glucose levels. Everything has to be in balance, and these hormones are working to make sure that they are. Okay, how do they do this? Well, hormones are a type of ligand, a signaling molecule that are going to bind to a receptor and make a cell behave differently. Maybe you remember this slide from BISC 1303. Hormones are a type of ligand. They bind to receptors present on target cells or inside of target cells and ultimately lead to some kind of cellular response. I'm being vague here of, bind to receptor, lead to cell response. Let's look at some more specific examples of this. So one of these examples has to do with, well, what we just talked about in the previous lecture, in the previous chapter. We've got ions and we've got water in the bloodstream. And again, we're excreting some of it, but we're retaining some of it. It's all about balance. We need this proper balance of stuff in the bloodstream. So the body needs to maintain proper balance of water and electrolytes, that's our ions, in the blood. So we know that this has to happen, but how does the body know what it's supposed to do? Well, here's where the hormones come in. And so this is the reason why I don't really like this chapter that much. It's not a very visually interesting chapter because a lot of hormones just end up looking like this, of this word does this word, which does this word. There's not a lot of body stuff that you could look at visually. But anyway, aldosterone is involved in regulation of balance of water and electrolytes, specifically water. So when water is low, a hormone is produced called antidiuretic hormone, or ADH. ADH stimulates water reabsorption. So these nephrons in the loop of Henle, they're always reabsorbing water. But if your water is low, you're not staying hydrated, you haven't had anything to drink today, maybe you've been sweating a lot, you're going to need extra water, and this antidiuretic hormone, ADH, is going to stimulate the kidneys to reabsorb more water. Similarly, when sodium levels are low, maybe you haven't been eating enough sodium in your diet, the hormone aldosterone stimulates these kidneys, the nephrons, to reabsorb more sodium. So again, it's all about balance here. When these are low, when sodium is low, you want to reabsorb more sodium. When water is low, you want to reabsorb more water. And these hormones, ADH and aldosterone, are the ones controlling this process in the kidneys. Another system that needs to be regulated in the body is the reproductive systems. So once again, we have a figure that's not really that interesting, just showing hormones and the effect with some big arrows here. But let's look at FSH first. So reproductive systems need to be regulated. Something called follicle stimulating hormone, or FSH, stimulates the maturation of sperm or egg cells. So it's named after follicles, which are an egg thing, but you can find FSH in anyone because it stimulates sperm to be made, and it stimulates eggs to finish up their maturation. And yeah, FSH triggering the maturation here, if we want to look at a female sex hormone figure. But again, it's kind of just arrows showing where they come from and what the effect is. But yeah, follicle stimulating hormones trigger this maturation. Another hormone involved in reproductive systems is the luteinizing hormone, which triggers ovulation. So this one is female reproductive system specific, but it's also, part of this overall menstrual cycle. And oh boy, there are a bunch of other hormones that we're not talking about, but here's our FSH, here's our luteinizing hormone, and yeah, they go through cycles to regulate this process. Again, I started by saying reproductive systems need to be regulated. The menstrual cycle is, more complicated than what happens in sperm maturation, but we've got a lot of these hormones in male and female reproductive systems. Again, don't sweat the details here, but it is kind of interesting. I just want you to know these two examples, that FSH promotes maturation of gametes, egg and sperm, and it's the luteinizing hormone, or LH, that triggers ovulation. One more example of something that needs to be regulated. And I mentioned this when I talked about glucose just earlier in this lecture. Levels of glucose in the bloodstream, when I mentioned insulin earlier in this chapter, levels of glucose in the bloodstream need to be regulated. Too much glucose is bad. Too little glucose is also bad. Where is this glucose coming from? Well, after a meal, your glucose levels get high. Remember, after you eat food and those nutrients are broken down and they're absorbed in the small intestine into the bloodstream. So after you eat a meal, glucose levels in your blood are going to get high. And like I just said, too much glucose is bad for you. So when glucose levels are high after a meal, this hormone called insulin is going to stimulate the uptake of glucose. It's going to cause your muscles and your liver to take some of that glucose in the bloodstream and store it in the form of glycogen. Again, this is just glucose, 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 glucose. It's stored away in these chains, and that reduces the concentration present in the bloodstream. So this is what happens after a meal. However, between meals, your glucose levels are going to get low. And again, low glucose is also a really bad thing. So a different hormone called glucagon stimulates the breakdown of glucose from glycogen in these muscles and liver. So when you don't have enough glucose, you're going to start chopping glycogen up in order to release some of that glucose into the bloodstream. And again, the figure for this is not terribly exciting, but it does show insulin causing glucose to be taken up and blood glucose levels go back down to normal. And if they get too low, glucagon causes the release of glucose and causes the levels to rise, again, back to a normal level. It's a constant up and down after meals and in between meals, trying to maintain, again, homeostasis, trying to make sure things are at their normal levels. If things are not maintained properly, stuff's going to go wrong. So improper function of hormones can lead to disease. There are many examples of this. I just want to point out one of these here, type 1 diabetes or diabetes mellitus type 1. You may remember type 1 diabetes. I name dropped this a couple of chapters ago because type 1 diabetes is actually an autoimmune disease. Cells in your immune system attack the beta cells of the pancreas. They attack cells that are responsible for producing insulin. So if you do not produce insulin, well, you're not going to be able to do this. Specifically, you're not going to be able to make the blood glucose levels fall after a meal. So type 1 diabetes is due to reduced production of insulin. Again, the autoimmunity here, destroying the cells that make insulin. That leads to blood glucose levels getting dangerously high. Again, too much glucose is bad. Too little glucose is also bad. I'm saying many negative effects because, yeah, these are some of the effects of untreated type 1 diabetes, of having too high of concentration of glucose in the bloodstream. It affects all the organs and the brain, lots of stuff going on, eventually leading to death. That's at coma and death. That's how bad this is. So again, improper function can lead to disease. Now, in general, the production of hormones is typically regulated. This is about regulation of hormone production. Hormone production is often regulated by something called negative feedback. Ooh, there's a lot of text on this slide, but let's go through this. Negative feedback simply refers to a process in which something shuts itself off. The effects of the hormone result in less of it being produced. We've seen this in action a couple of times. So to go back to the insulin and glucagon stuff, if blood glucose levels are high, diabetes notwithstanding, in normal circumstances, if blood glucose levels are high, that leads to the creation of insulin. What insulin does is cause blood glucose levels to fall. That means your body stops making as much insulin. The hormone has shut itself off. The effect of the hormone result in less of that hormone being produced. A similar thing happens if I can scroll back to the antidiuretic hormone. This is produced when water levels are low. The effect of the hormone causes reabsorption of more water. When that happens, water is not going to be low anymore, so your body's not going to make as much ADH. The effect of this hormone shuts off its own production. But then, If water runs low again, then you're going to make more hormone and it's going to absorb more water and you're going to make less hormone, but then you run low on water and you're going to make more of this ADH hormone. And so it's this constant up and down, this constant back and forth. But what this achieves is maintaining things in a narrow range, in a normal concentration. So to read through this slide, the effects of the hormone result in less of it being produced. It shuts itself off. But when the effects of this hormone lessen, you're going to make more of that hormone again, and then it's going to shut itself off, and then you're going to make more of it, and it'll shut itself off. It's a constant cycle, but that's negative feedback. The whole purpose of this is that it maintains the concentration of water or ions or glucose or whatever it is in a narrow range without getting too high or too low. And hey, that was the point of this whole chapter, homeostasis. Now, there's one last section in this chapter, and that is talking about where these hormones come from. Hormones are produced by, a bunch of stuff. Even more stuff. Oh, there's the third one. Even more parts of the body. So this is another reason why this chapter is kind of a rough one visually. This whole system is decentralized. There's not some specific, there's a stomach, there's a large intestine, there's a small intestine that you can point to. There are lots of different parts of the body that are responsible for making lots of different hormones. So without memorizing all of these tables, what's the take home from this? Well, most hormones are produced in these locations. The brain. We didn't do brain anatomy when we were talking about the nervous system, so I can't point out specific parts of the brain, but there are specific parts of the brain that make different hormones, but I'm just going to say brain. Another organ involved in the endocrine system is the pancreas. And hey, we've seen this before. This was also involved in the digestive system, making pancreatic juices, making these chyme neutralizing bicarbonate and the digestive enzymes. Yeah, it plays an important role in that. It also makes some hormones. Additionally, we see adrenal glands. So these are located above the kidneys. They produce a lot of different hormones, including adrenaline, which is what adrenal glands are named for, but they do other stuff as well. And then the thyroid gland is another big one. This is located in front of the trachea, so this would be in the throat. This makes a bunch of hormones as well. So again, without memorizing these tables, I just want to make this statement. Most hormones are produced by the brain in various parts. The pancreas, which to remind you is located in the abdominal cavity, the adrenal glands located above the kidneys, and the thyroid gland or the thyroid located in front of the trachea. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of this recorded lecture. So this is the end of recorded lecture 5.5 and the end of this chapter and the end of this exam and the end of this quarter. So hopefully this was an interesting capstone referring back to a lot of stuff. But that's it for 5.5.